Did you just get a bunch of new gear and not really sure what gems to slot in there? Well, in today's video, I'm going to be going over each individual gem as well as the Runeglass so you can decide from there what is best to put in your build. Before we get into talking about the gems and Runeglass, I do just want to say if this video helps you out or if you just like it, please drop it a like. It really does help me out a lot. And if you want to see more content like this, including more build videos, loot videos, stuff like that, definitely subscribe to the channel so you know when those videos go up. And I do stream throughout the week over on Twitch as well as YouTube, so definitely stop by, ask some questions, say hello, lurk, anything like that. We would love to have you. But let's get into today's video. All right, so to get us started, we are going to hop into the stone cutting station here and go on down to the cut gems. So with the cut gemstones, what we're going to be looking at, just so you get an idea of the difference in the tiers, are the amber and the amethyst gems. And what we'll look at is both the damage side as well as the more armor side. So taking a look at the amber, with the amber being that it scales with focus, it is going to convert 50% of that damage to nature damage with a 35% scaling in focus. That is for the flawed gem. And then on the armor side, you get a 3% nature damage absorption. So pretty solid as far as that goes. And then when we look at the amethyst, this is an int-based gem, so it converts 50% of that damage dealt to void damage. And then that scales with 45%. So all of the int gems, whether it's for void or for ice or anything like that, is going to have the same scaling. The only difference is going to be with the amber because it scales off focus. They did lower that scaling amount on it. So with the amber, you get a 3% nature absorption. For some reason on the amethyst, you only get a 2.5% damage absorption on that. But then as we go up the list here, once we get to the regular ones, you see the scaling bumps up to 45% and the damage absorption is now 4% for the amber. When we look at the amethyst, it is now a 55% scaling with the int and then a 3.5% damage absorption for void. Further up we go with the brilliant gems. With the amber, we're looking at a 55% scaling, and then the damage absorption is up to 5% now for nature. With the amethyst, now that we hit brilliant, now for some reason it matches at the 5% damage absorption, but the scaling for the damage output is 65%. So it's very odd that prior to the brilliant, the damage absorption is different. I don't understand why, but once you hit the brilliant side, then it matches up with the amber. Once we get into the pristines here, then we have a 65% scaling with focus for the nature gem, and then a 6% nature damage absorption. Over on the int side with the amethyst, we have a 75% scaling with a 6% void damage absorption. So you can see that from the flawed all the way up to the pristine, it's different than it used to be. It didn't always used to be a 50% conversion throughout the entire every single tier, and then the scaling was also different. So now what they did is they made it so it's a 50% scaling or 50% conversion on every single tier of gem, and then the scaling itself changes. And then as far as the armor goes, it's still just the damage absorption is going to fluctuate as you go from flawed all the way up to pristine. So next, we are going to look at each individual gem so you know what each one does and where you might be able to apply it. So we have gone over the amber, which is going to be 50% of your damage dealt, is now nature, and then a 65% scaling. The amethyst as well, we have said is going to be 50% conversion over to void with a 75% scaling. The aquamarine, we are looking at a ice conversion with 50% and a 75% int scaling, and then 6% ice damage absorption. The carnelian is going to be a tank's favorite gem. So with the carnelian, you generate 300% more threat, and it allows you to utilize taunts with certain weapons and abilities. So as a tank, it is a fairly necessary gem unless you are running the specific artifact that initiates those specific taunts. But I still like to run my carnelians in my weapons. It works really, really well. If you do put it in your armor, you will generate 10% less threat and deal 2% more damage to taunted foes. So kind of an interesting way to go about it for armor, but I think it's really, really cool. With the Cut Pristine Diamond, this is a healer's personal gem that we like to run, and I like to run it in a lot of my armor. But what you get is a 15% damage and outgoing healing buff while at full health. So as long as you are at full health, you are doing 15% more damage, and you are doing 15% more healing. On your armor, what you get is kind of interesting. It is a 1.9% physical and a 0.62% elemental damage absorption. So I'm going to show you in a little bit why I really like the diamonds and what combination you can actually do in order to get a certain amount of resistance. On the emerald, they have changed this one up as well. And what it is a 16% damage increase against and 5% healing to targets below 50% health. So it's a little bit of a damage buff, but it's also the first gem that we've gotten outside of the diamond that has even slightly a bit of a healing buff. So it's not huge, but it is just nice to start getting more gems that have some of the healing buffs out of it, just to have a few more options. And then for armor, you get a 5% thrust damage absorption. For the Cut Pristine Jasper, what you're going to get is you gain a stack of 8% damage for 5 seconds after blocking or taking a hit with a max of 3 stacks, so up to 24% increased damage output just for blocking or taking a hit. So really great for a bruiser if you know you're going to be getting hit or if you're running a shield. Really, really fantastic type of a gem. I've been running it in a few of my other weapons and it's worked great. As for the armor, you get a 5% strike damage absorption. For the Malachite, this is my favorite as a mage when I'm running my Ice Gauntlet, and what you get is a 12% damage buff against targets affected by crowd control effects. So that's most of the Ice Gauntlet abilities, is going to apply some form of a crowd control, so I really do like running this. You could run it with some other weapons as well, but Ice Gauntlet is my go-to. For the armor, it's kind of an interesting one. It is the opposite of a diamond. So you get a 1.9% elemental and 0.62% physical damage absorption. So they just took a diamond and flip-flopped the physical and elemental damage absorption. For the Moonstone, Moonstone has changed a bit, and what it does now is a 20% damage buff while all your active abilities are on cooldown. So while all your weapon abilities are on cooldown, you get a 20% buff. I personally have not tested this. Let me know in the comments if you have tested it and how it's worked for you, but I haven't tested this yet. It seems interesting. I just don't know how viable it is for a lot of the builds that I personally run. But if you have a build that the Moonstone works really well for you, please let me know how you've been using it and if you've really noticed that increase in damage. On your armor, you also get a 5% slash damage absorption. So really nice if you are a melee or getting hit by a lot of slash damage in general. Next, we're looking at the Onyx, and what you get is a plus 18% damage against targets above 70% health. So not bad. It used to be, I believe, a 30% increase in damage against full health targets. I didn't really use it in that sense, but I did like it for the armor side. For armor, you get a plus 2.5% physical damage absorption. So as a bruiser and stuff, you can definitely run it just to get a bit extra physical damage absorption. Then it goes across slash, strike, all the different types of physical damage. The Pristine Opal, you get a 12% damage while your stamina is not full. This is a very useful very useful gem for those who dodge a lot and try to always be on the move. A lot of light armors like to run it especially. I run opals in a few of my weapons and it works really well for just that kind of pretty easy extra damage output. On your armor, it is going to be the opposite of the Onyx. You get a 2.5% elemental damage absorption as opposed to the physical like the Onyx. So again, very useful gem for armor and for weapons. Next, we're looking at the Ruby, which is going to be another elemental gem. It's going to convert 50% of your damage over to fire, and then that 75% scaling alongside the 6% fire damage absorption if you choose to put that in your armor or jewelry. Next is the Sapphire, same thing as the previous ones, except for this is going to scale with focus. So we're looking at a 50% conversion over to Arcane, and then that is going to scale with your focus if your focus is higher at a 65% scaling rate. And then in your armor, it will be a 6% Arcane damage absorption. And then the last of the gems here is the Topaz, and with the Topaz, like all the other int gems, it is a 50% conversion, but over to lightning with that 75% scaling. and a 65% lightning damage absorption. So those are all the gems. With the armor gems, as far as when we're looking at like the elemental for armor, those gems are going to come in handy when you're looking at, let's say, if you're a PvPer and there's just, like flamethrower meta or whatever, where you're just seeing a ton of fire damage. It can definitely come in handy there, or for the PvE side, if you're doing mutated dungeons, then you might want to slot in some of the elemental gems in order to combat some of the elemental mutations that you'll be going up against. So, especially for M3s, you're going to want to make sure you're running those elemental gems, but in general, you don't need to go too far out of your way. Okay, so next we are going to take a look over at the Runeglass, and I'm just going to use the Amber as an example so you can just see kind of what's happening to the gem, and then we'll maybe look at one or two other ones just so you can kind of see how some of that fluctuates. But just so we can get an idea of which each Runeglass does, we'll just start with the Amber. So what you're going to see when you're looking at Runeglass is when we're looking at the focus or int gem specifically, it is going to reduce that scaling down from whatever that top is. So for the focus, it is a 65% down to a 55%, and then int and so on. So with the specific Runeglass, what you're going to see is with the empowered, it is actually going to apply 2 ticks or 2 seconds worth of 8% arcane damage. So you just get 2 extra kind of dots when you hit someone with an ability or with an attack. And then in your armor, what you're going to see is you get that 5% nature damage absorption, and then your arcane attacks deal 2% more damage. So you actually get a damage buff out of it, but then your absorption does take a little bit of a hit. So the downside to that for your armor is you are going to be a little bit squishier, a little bit more susceptible to getting hit and all of that, but your damage output will be higher. Next, looking at the ignited amber, same deal as the empowered, only it's going to convert to fire as far as those 2 little ticks at the end, and then same deal for the armor, you get that 5% absorption, but then the 2% damage output. With the leeching, what you're going to see is, again, the scaling is going to be nerfed, but then instead what you get is heal for 3% of the damage you deal. So it is a nice leeching ability or leeching perk, but it is a 2-second cooldown. So it's not the best, but it's also not the worst, depending on how your build is and how you're utilizing it. And then on your armor, what you get is that same 5% absorption, but then you heal for 1% of the damage you deal. So with 5 stacks, that'd be a 5%, healing or life steal. And then if you have it on your weapon, you end up getting about 8% total. On the frozen, same as the other elemental, you are going to get 2 ticks of 8% ice damage as well as the 2% damage if you have it on your armor with the 5% damage absorption. Electrified, same deal, 8% with the lightning ticks and then a 2% damage increase in lightning damage on your armor. The siphoning is kind of a bit different a one. I don't see too many people running it, but what you get is a plus 1.5 mana on hit with a 2-second cooldown. It is not that much mana, and then on your armor, it's only 0.8 mana on hit with a 2-second cooldown. So the siphoning one, personally, I don't use it. I've tried it like once or twice. It just did not work out for me. I did not care for it. So I don't personally run it. Let me know, though, if you found a use for it or if it does seem to work really well, but to me, it just doesn't seem great. The punishing is going to be for you melee users. It is still going to scale that damage down to 55% scaling, and then your melee attacks deal 2% more damage if it's on the weapon. If it's on your armor, what you get is a 1% increase in damage to all your melee attacks with that same 5% damage absorption. On the Arboreal, just like the other nature ones or the other elemental, you are going to get 2 ticks of poison at the end. That is going to be 8% nature damage, and then you get 2% extra nature damage output, as well as the 5% absorption. On the sighted, this is going to apply to your ranged attacks, and you're going to get a plus 2% damage output to ranged attacks if it's on your weapon, and then a 1% increase in ranged damage if it's on your armor, as well as that 5% damage absorption. On the energizing, what this one is a lot more popular now, and what it is a plus 4 stamina on hit with a 3-second cooldown. And then on your armor, it's plus 1 stamina on hit with a 3-second cooldown. So this one's grown in popularity because of the fact that with the changes to heavy armor dodging, being that it's a 55 cost stam dodge. And then obviously if you have hardy, 2 dodges puts you at 110, so that you end up eating up all your stam and you're exhausted. But if you get 1 hit in there, then you can actually double dodge and still get away with it. So a lot of people are running the energizing right now just because if you're in heavy, it's very, very useful just to get that extra dodge in there. And then for the last one is the Abyssal, which is just going to be the void damage, and it's going to inflict the two ticks of 8% void damage, and then the plus 2% void damage output if it's on your armor with the 5% absorption. So you can see across the board, the scaling is going to be the same, the absorption is going to be the same. It's just the different kind of specific perks, and usually it's going to be anywhere between like 1 to 2% on armor, and then between like 2 and 8% on the weapon itself, depending on obviously if you go with int or like the melee or whatever. And then let's take a look at the int just so you can see the conversion. So it's still that 50% conversion, but it's a 65% scaling instead of the normal 75% scaling. And then let's take a look even further down. On the Carnelian, you're going to get 250% threat instead of 300, and then on the armor, 8% less threat and deal 1.5% more damage to taunted foes. So it's a little bit of a nerf there, still not too much. And then like the 50% drop in your threat probably isn't a huge deal as a tank, just being that if you have enough taunts and stuff, you can kind of maintain a lot of that threat. Over on the diamond, what you're going to see is it drops down to a 12% damage output and 12% outgoing healing output. So you get a little bit of a nerf there. And then you can see that the damage absorption is now 1.5% down to 0.5% for the elemental. And the 1.5 is for the physical. So you definitely are going to be a little bit squishier. You're not going to have as much of that damage absorption. So that does play a pretty big role into some of the survivability aspects of your build and how you are running it. Same deal for a lot of these though. As you go through each of these, the Runeglass does nerf. It nerfs the kind of like main stat of that gem, but then you just need to decide for your individual build, is it worth it to then get that extra increase as far as whatever perk that specific Runeglass has for you. So next, let's take a look here at my jewelry or my gems and stuff. So as you can see, I have 5 diamonds in my armor, 2 opals in my jewelry, and a malachite. This exact combination I found to be the cheapest way for me to get a flat 10% resistance to every single elemental type. Now I have 25% on the thrust because my amulet actually has extra thrust protection, but if you want a flat 10% to every single damage type in the game, you can run the 5 diamonds in your armor, or it doesn't matter if it's in your armor, but 5 diamonds, 2 opals, 1 malachite. And that makes a really, really big difference as far as just being able to take reduced damage from everything. Now, if you're a PvPer, you might find that there are certain resistances that you want higher or lower, so definitely change them up based on what you feel like you need. And then on the other side of the PvE world, if you're doing a lot of mutated dungeons and stuff like that, you're going to want to try to get that elemental resistance as high as you can for some of those M3 dungeons, because some of those mutations can hurt really, really bad, and having that higher resistance to that element can make a really, really big difference. Looking at my weapon here, I like to run a Runeglass in my primary weapons. Some of my other weapons that I'm swapping out gems and stuff more often, I don't put Runeglass in because it is expensive. When you put a gem or another Runeglass into a weapon or an item that has a Runeglass already, it ends up eating that. You don't get it back. It's kind of just a waste. So I try to only put Runeglass in weapons or armor that I know I'm for sure going to be using it and happy with it, because it does add up if you end up having to replace it. So it kind of just depends on what you're looking for, but I do like having a couple extra ticks on my life staff. Gives me just a little bit more charge over on my art rune, so I've found a lot of use out of it. I like having the extra ticks, but you definitely don't have to. You don't have to run in your Runeglass if you don't want to, but I do find that there are certain builds that it can come in handy, especially like my musket build and stuff like that. But that is going to do it for today's video, so until next time, I'll see you guys later.